Hey everyone, welcome back to the DTV Connoisseur Podcast. This is DTV Connoisseur Podcast Extra, number 2. We're going to be looking at Fast and Furious and Fast 5 here in just a little bit. Before we do, next week, Ty from Come Up is going to be back on. We're going to be looking at 2 Casper Van Dien movies. So we're taking a little break from the Willis, as we've been wont to do lately. And we're going to be looking at a movie called The Most Dangerous Game, one of those Most Dangerous Game kind of movies. I had a CT from The Challenge, I guess. I always knew it as Real World Road Rules Challenge, and of course he was the Paris season of the Real World. He played your token Eastern Bostonian guy or Eastern Mass guy that they would always have on the show. So it was kind of a fun episode, kind of a fun movie we talked about. The other Casper Van Dien film was Red Prophecy, an Alexander Nevsky film where we've got Michael Madsen, Eric Roberts, and Casper Van Dien, and they're all dubbed. So that was definitely an interesting one. So definitely check that one out. In terms of the blog, still looking to try to get some Fred Williamson up. So we'll see if next week, this weekend, if I finally make some Williamson happen. The film that's in the can that's kind of next up on the list is Project Eliminator. It's a Frank Zagarino, David Carradine film. I watched it way back when we did the Zagarino podcast episode with the guys from Comeuppance. So it's been in the can since then. One of those ones that I've been meaning to review. As you saw, like Robo Vampire, I finally made that one happen. That one's been sitting in the can almost a year to the day that the podcast episode that I did with Mitch from the Video Vacuum dropped. So it's been one of those things where it's like these episodes that I watch for podcasts, I like to review them, and sometimes they sit, but then there's other films that sort of take precedence. So like Fred Williamson, meaning to get more Fred Williamson up. He's at like 27 movies now, so we want to get him into the 30 club. Foxtrap is one I've been looking at. It's on Tubi. I think it's one that he directed as well, so we wanted to get that one in there. There's also been some new stuff that's come out. Repeater, a new Gary Daniels film, so we wanted to do that. Also, Gary Daniels' Christian films are now available on Tubi, so it's like, oh boy, we could get some more Gary Daniels up there. As we know, he's close to 60 movies on the site, so we want to kind of keep pushing for that. Accident Man 2 is available right now, so that's one, more Scott Adkins. Want to maybe get that one in at some point. Also, the new Dolph film, The Best Man, that was available to rent. It's a $5.99 rental, but with Comcast, I get these deals with my rewards where I can do one for $1. So you do like a $5.99 one for $1, which isn't a bad deal, right? So I may kind of do that dollar rental thing and get some Dolph in the can here as well. So a lot of stuff coming up on the blog. We'll hopefully get that stuff going there soon. But yeah, right now we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to look at some Fast and Furious and Fast 5.
Hey everyone, we'll get back to the podcast in a second, but first I have a new novel out, Holtman Arms. It follows Colvin Hall, an aspiring writer who decides to write a romance novel on a whim, sends it to a publisher, and it becomes a huge success. The only problem is, no one knows it's him because he writes under the pen name Mary Ballantyne. With all of the money and none of the fame, Colvin longs for the world to recognize his accomplishments. When he gets an opportunity to write a freelance article on a washed-up 90s pop star looking for a comeback, that recognition starts to come, but is it all he hoped for? It doesn't matter, because he's getting it whether he likes it or not. Holtman Arms is the second in my author's cycle after A Girl and a Gun, and like that previous novel, it explores themes of success and accomplishment in the 21st century. You can buy it now through Amazon in paperback or on Kindle. The link is in the podcast description. As always, thanks for your support.
All right, we are back, and we're going to start talking about Fast and Furious here. And one of the things I think I wanted to do is kind of take us back to 2009 and sort of get a sense of where the film industry was at when this movie was made, and even kind of get a sense of where this franchise was at that time. Right, we had parts 1, 2, and 3. Right, part 3, Tokyo Drift, doesn't really do well. They get Vin Diesel to do that little appearance at the end because test audiences were not really big on the film. It didn't do as well as the other ones. There was a sense that this franchise was on life support, right? And here comes Vin Diesel in to say, like, okay, let's do another installment. He said he wanted to do 4 and 5 at the same time, and the studio said, let's just do 4 first and see how it goes. So there was that piece. The other thing, of course, too, is thinking about like the late 2000s into the early 2010s. We had a lot of franchises at that time that were I don't want to say they were on their last leg, but they're in sort of weird spots. I mean, the same year this comes out, right? There's a Final Destination sequel that, similar to this, right, is not labeled as a sequel or isn't labeled as like a part 4 or something like that. It's just, I think it's also called The Final Destination, the way this was called Fast and Furious. You had a lot of stars at that time as well, like Vin Diesel, who their star had fallen a little bit, and they were coming back to these franchises as a way to reboot their own careers, right? That the way that they were trying to save the franchise, they were hoping the franchise would save them. So this was kind of a common thing that was happening at this time, and it made sense in 2009 that a franchise that was on its last legs would have a star whose popularity had fallen a little bit come back to the franchise and make an installment that had a title like Fast and Furious. It wasn't like directly listed as a sequel, that kind of thing. So that all kind of made sense at that time. The other thing, right, is that Iron Man comes out in 2009. And that's the start of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, comic book movies at that time had been doing well in the theater. I mean, of course, we think of the Dark Knight, right, was a big one at that time. You had the Star Wars, or the Spider-Man movies before that. But at the same time, they weren't like the massive thing that the Marvel Cinematic Universe would become. And so Iron Man starts us down that path of what the movie industry ends up being. So what's interesting, right, is that this Fast and Furious movie, when it comes out, it ends up breathing new life into the franchise, and the franchise pivots into this blockbuster franchise that it ends up becoming. It positions itself to be this exception to what the rule was, right? Because what happens in the 2010s, Disney ends up, they have the rights to Marvel, they have the rights to Star Wars, they have the rights to Pixar, plus they have the rights to their own Disney movies. And what Disney could do at that time is that they could take the theaters in the summer and just clog them up with their own movies. So you could have a Star Wars movie, you could have a Marvel movie, you could have a Pixar movie, and you could have a Disney live action movie or a cartoon take up as many screens as possible in the theater, so that then when something else was trying to come in, whether it was a DC movie, one of these Fast and Furious movies, there wasn't a lot of room for them to work in there. But the Fast and the Furious, kind of coming through after, let's say, number 5, it becomes the exception to that rule. It's the one that sort of, against all odds, is able to gross, over $1 billion. It's amazing that the franchise becomes that, because here in part 4, it's still a little bit reminiscent of the previous 3 movies in the sense that it's a lot of car chase stuff. I mean, we're now 4 films into an action franchise and haven't had an exploding helicopter yet, and we still don't get one in this film. We do, though, right in the beginning of the film, when Vin Diesel and his crew are hijacking an oil tanker. We probably get like the biggest action sequence that we've had out of any of the franchise at this point. So there is a sense that this franchise is moving in a different direction. There's some parts about the movie that I wasn't as big a fan of. One is, I really like Scott Walker in this. Scott Walker has a really great foot chase scene, where he's in a suit as a sleek, slick FBI agent, chasing a witness down. And Vin Diesel still has beef with him, right, for what happened in the first film, even though Scott Walker let him go. And there's some scenes where, he's giving Walker a hard time. At one point, he's fighting with Walker, and he essentially is kind of beating him up and trashing his house. And it was hard for me to root for Vin Diesel in that moment when Scott Walker is so cool, right? So that part of it didn't work as well for me. The Vin Diesel piece of it, it was just it was a little reminiscent of Seagal and Seagal's films, so that kind of that omnipotent piece where kind of everything works for him. But at the same time, at the end when he's supposed to be going to jail, I don't want to see him go to jail either. So I liked him enough in that sense. I like Gal Gadot in this. Gal Gadot was really good. She's kind of introduced to the series here in that piece. We get Han back from Tokyo Drift. I always liked his character. It was really cool to see him there too. So there are some elements that work. The other thing about this movie that I realized in watching it as a whole group of movies together is that this movie, and I guess it makes sense with the sense that Vin Diesel wanted to do 4 and 5 at the same time. So he's making 4 knowing that 5 was coming, or that he had 5 in mind. And this movie feels like that. Like it doesn't, I don't know that it works great as a standalone movie by itself. Like, I think if I'm watching this one by itself as a movie, I'm not it doesn't work as much. But when I watched it in 5 immediately after, I liked it better. I liked it as this pivot where this series moves from car chases. I mean, Tokyo Drift feels like a direct-to-video movie that made it to the theater, right? That's really in it. And yes, I said in the last episode that I really liked Tokyo Drift. I really enjoyed that one. But it is still has a direct-to-video movie kind of feel to it. So, we're pivoting away from that kind of action into what ends up being Fast Five, ends up being this big, huge action franchise. And this movie is really almost like the perfect pivot for that. And that's something that I did really like, that we get reintroduced to the characters again. They bring them back to us. We get to see Vin Diesel. We get to see Scott Walker again. We see Mia again. They introduce some new characters. They bring them in a little bit for us. We get a sense, too, of what's going to happen in the next one, where we start bringing back old characters from the other franchises and sort of building out the team that way. So in that sense, it's a fascinating kind of movie. And I don't know that I can think of another movie like that it doesn't necessarily work on its own. I mean, it's interesting because you think of like the first 3 Star Wars, or the prequel trilogy, as they call it, for Star Wars, where it's almost like they're making movies to get us to A New Hope or the original Star Wars. They're almost like making them to get us there. So those are kind of movies that they almost kind of have that feel to them too. Like they don't work on their own, but they work in the context of trying to get us to A New Hope. But this is I enjoy this one a little bit better in that context of being like a pivot film. It's like moving us from the first 3 into what the franchise ends up being, after that. So I would say if you're watching these, I would say 4 is better if you're watching 4 and 5 together. I would plan a good Saturday night where you're just, you've got your TV set up, you got your snacks, you need some, my favorite go-to is either popcorn or Doritos. As you know, I'm a big Doritos fan. Also, bad soft drinks. I'm a Mountain Dew. One of my new favorites is the Dr. Pepper, the strawberries and cream flavored Dr. Pepper. I'm a fan of that. But yeah, I'm more of a junk food than an alcohol guy. I used to be more of an alcohol guy, but I'm more of a junk food guy now. So yeah, set yourself up with your junk food. Maybe order a pizza, or here in Philly, a nice cheesesteak will do the trick for you. And I think cue both of them together, 4 and 5 together. I think you'll enjoy it better. I think you'd like 4 better that way. But yeah, I think I don't even know where I would rank 4. I don't even know how I would rank 4. And I guess everything nowadays is ranking. I was going to do a letterbox ranking of the Fast and Furious movies. I don't really even know how I rank 4 now when I think about it, because I don't know where it sits. Is it better or worse than some of those later big blockbuster ones? I guess it's probably not as good as like 6, 7, or 8. But if I combine it with 5 together, it really makes something really, really special from an action standpoint. So there's that element there too. But yeah, that's part 4 for me there. And we'll take a break here, and then we'll take a look at part 5. All right, we are back, and we're going to look at Fast 5 here, which I think Fast 5 is my favorite out of the entire series. Like, this is, I think this might be the top one for me. I was trying to think of what else. Maybe Hobbs and Shaw might be, sort of spoiler alert when we get to that one. That one's up there as well for me. But this one is up there. And I think it's, it's an interesting one because this is the one really where the franchise really establishes itself as the blockbuster. And it establishes itself as a blockbuster at the perfect time, right? Because we were talking about how in the early 2010s, late 2000s, early 2010s, Disney's starting to create this momentum that essentially allows it to really, really get a stranglehold over the movie industry. And I think if Fast and the Furious didn't come out of the gates with this entry here, this Fast 5 one, I don't know that they get to be that sort of that exception to the rule that they became during that 2010s Disney dominance that we ended up seeing. This movie, I believe it did about $600 million in the box office, worldwide, which, to give you some context for that, I think that was more than the first 3 movies made combined. So, huge to come out and make over $500 million. The previous entry, Fast 4, made $300 million. So it did about double what Fast 4 did. So it's this massive thing, and it's well deserved. I mean, we talk about how how Part 4 was a pivot. this one fully realizes the pivot, right, into what the Fast and Furious franchise blockbuster, or the blockbuster franchise ends up becoming. Probably the biggest thing, right, the biggest difference between this and the other ones is they tapped Spiro Razatos to be their action director, their second unit director for these films. So this is the first one that he becomes a part of. Fans of this site would know Spiro Razatos as he was really the man behind so many of the great PM Entertainment flicks out there. And it's probably one of the bigger misses on my part that I haven't tagged him on the site, that he doesn't have a tag. I think if he had a tag, he'd probably be at least over 20, 25. He's probably due to be in the Hall of Fame. I've talked about names like Danny Trejo, who are probably going to get. Danny Trejo is going to have over 30 tags, which means he's going to have an automatic entry. Spiro Razatos should be in the Hall of Fame. What we think of as the golden age of DTV action, late 80s into the early 90s, a huge chunk of the reason why it's a golden age is because of Spiro Razatos and the work he did as action director at that time. You combine him with some other names like Art Camacho, and you really, really get a sense of like what I mean. Just going down his CV. I mean, the 3 R's, right? The Gary Daniels 3 R's of PM. He's behind all of them, including my favorite, Recoil. The Sweeper, one that Ty and Brett have as their number 1 PM flick. It's my number 2 behind Recoil. He's stunt coordinator for that one as well. Last Man Standing, I believe that was in the top 5 for both Ty and Brett and I for our top 5 PM Entertainment flicks. He's behind that one. T-Force, another great one, right? Probably just outside my top 10 for that one. Martial Outlaw, another great Jeff Wincott. That's him as well. Rage and Honor, one of my favorite Rothrock and Norton films, right? He did stunts on that one. But then, also too, you get into things like One Man Force, right? With Matsuzak. One of our favorites when we talk about our favorite, direct-to-video films. That's one that always comes up as a great one. So Spiro Razatos is really coming into his own here in the 2000s. He's one of the premier action directors in the business. Someone who got his start with PM and low-budget stuff in the late 80s into the 90s. By 2010, he's one of the best. And he takes this Fast Five franchise into something that's beyond what any of us looked at it as at the time. He takes that little bit that we have in Fast and Furious, where they do what is it like the I'm trying to think what happens there, where it's like that like I think I just talked about it, and of course I'm already losing track of my thoughts here. Right, I just talked about the gas heist scene, right? He takes that little nugget and just builds it into something huge, and this franchise, of course, this is what we talked about when we talked about part 3 in the previous episode. We talked about how the episodes don't really build on each other. The movies don't build on each other. They're almost like standalone films. 5 builds on 4, and 5 builds on 4 in more of an organic way, in the sense that, like we talked about, Vin Diesel wanted to do both movies at the same time. So it kind of makes sense. But each film after 5 becomes bigger than 5. Which it's weird that you think that I would think 5 would be my favorite when all the other ones coming after it are bigger. But I almost kind of like the scope of how 5 worked, if that makes any sense. We also get that element, right, that the Vin Diesel was big on, that sort of that Dungeons and Dragons thing of building your team or your party, right? I think it's what they call it in Dungeons and Dragons, a party. He does this thing where he takes characters from the previous movies and puts them into the film, brings them back into the film, which is kind of a really cool thing, right? I mean, growing up, I think about like reading comic books, and part of what made the Marvel Cinematic Universe so cool, right, is that when you read comic books growing up, Spider-Man could appear in a Daredevil issue, or a Ghost Rider. I mean, I first learned who Ghost Rider was because I saw him in a Daredevil issue. So, you could see people teaming up and getting together. And Vin Diesel gives us that by saying, like, yeah, hey, let's bring everybody that you liked back. So we get Tyrese is back, as Roman. We get, Han back, right, from Tokyo Drift. We get, from Tokyo Drift. We get Ludacris back, right? Gal Gadot comes back from Fast and Furious. So we get all these people back, which is really cool to see them all together like that. And I that element that Vin Diesel brings to an action film that you don't always get. Even in action films, when they bring on like a team, or we're going to put the team together, we're going to put a team together, or something like that. It doesn't have the same vibe that this did, where it was like people that we knew and we'd seen them in previous movies, and they're bringing them all together, kind of like the Laugh Olympics, right? If you followed Hanna-Barbera, right? But you see Yogi, and whoever, Scooby Doo, competing in the Laugh Olympics. It was always kind of cool to see them all brought together. No, Vin Diesel gives us the Laugh Olympics here in Fast 5. Then, of course, we have The Rock, right? We have Dwayne Johnson, who is just fantastic. Because I think one of the problems we have with Vin Diesel is because he's this sort of larger-than-life character. He's created as this larger-than-life character that there was no real counter force to his larger-than-life character. And what I'd heard was they originally wanted Tommy Lee Jones to be the role. Now, that's IMDb trivia. Who knows if it's true or not? Because if you look at the IMDb trivia for the first film, I think somebody wrote that the original plan was to cast Mario Lopez in Vin Diesel's part, Mark Paul Gosselaar in Paul Walker's part, and Screech in that character who was the one who was like a keen on doing all the engines. So I mean, you never know what you're going to get in IMDb trivia, which I love the idea of somebody writing that. I mean, there's that little 1% piece of me that thinks like, oh, maybe it was true. But anyway, so it's possible that Tommy Lee Jones wasn't tapped to be the part that Dwayne Johnson does. But my hunch is that they wanted the character to be kind of more of this like Western Texas Ranger tracker kind of type, as opposed to being who he is, which is this massive force that Dwayne Johnson is. And he just comes in like a bull in a china shop and just gets after it. And so you get this sort of, instead of having the unipolar vibe that you get from having Vin Diesel in the films, to now have this bipolar or this multipolar universe where you've now got Vin Diesel and The Rock sort of coming up against each other. The fight scene they have is really great, but also we get probably what is my favorite moment from the entire series, which is when the sort of the all hope is lost, right? They realize that there's no way they're going to be able to get this money. How are we going to get it? We can't break it out of a prison or whatever it is. They just feel like there's no way that they're going to do this. And Vin Diesel's trying to rally everybody. He's trying to get everybody together, and he's like, okay, who's with me? And you just hear off screen, "I'll ride with you, Toretto." And that was it for me. I was just like, that was my Tiger Woods fist pump moment there. Just absolutely love that. So I think the most, as much as we could get of that, I think that's another piece of it, right? That the Rock, Dwayne Johnson, he takes this to another level. So we've got Spiro Razatos taking this to another level. We've got Dwayne Johnson taking this to another level. Justin Lin, who directed Tokyo Drift and then comes back and directs Fast and Furious, he's also sort of taking this in that direction. And you have Vin Diesel, who's on board for it, right? And he's giving it this that Dungeons and Dragons element that you didn't even know you needed in an action film. But it is such a very unique element, because so many action films and so many of these adventure movies, it's usually about one or two people coming together against all odds. And Vin Diesel with this whole family thing, it's this really fun team aspect of it that just makes it really enjoyable. So when you put all that together, it is just I mean, I don't know. It's just, for me, it's just a fantastic actioner, and just all of it works there. So I really, really like that. I mean, there are some other aspects to it. You're right. We get Vince back, who, if you remember, I talked about Matt Schultz and the douche chill factor that we had. They toned that down a little bit in this one here, but he does come back. We do get to see him a bit. I mean, again, it's right off the bat, we're just getting bigger action scenes when, they go to try to steal some cars off a train. Always love that. Me, I'm a huge fan of train travel anyway. So if you can add trains in anything, it's always going to work for me. I know at some point I still haven't, me saying all that, right? I still haven't reviewed Crackerjack 2 for the site. So all this time, we're almost 1,200 reviews in, and I still haven't done Crackerjack 2. So I talk about being a train fan, and I still haven't done that one. But that scene really worked. Yeah, it's just all really good. And knowing that we're going to kind of take this and go into episode 6, and they give us some teasers about maybe Letty's alive, Michelle Rodriguez, some of those factors. It takes this thing into this other direction. And of course, what happens, right, with part 5 is that part 5 is coming in, right, in 2011. So the Marvel Cinematic Universe is starting to establish itself. It's starting to make itself into what we end up knowing it as, that we start, they're starting to build the characters out, right? They're starting to give us more people in them. So we know there's that, right? We know that, that with the Dark Knight having been made, right, that there's going to be this bigger finale to the trilogy there that's going to have Bane, and that's going to be kind of its own big thing. So there's a lot of stuff sort of happening at that time. But the other thing too that I think that's important about all of this is that, as we're pivoting into the 2010s, as Marvel, as Disney starting to take over and sort of really, really assert itself in there, what the Fast and the Furious does with number 5 is it gives all of these other franchises hope that they could maybe potentially do something else, that they could sort of they could potentially compete, I think is what I want to say, that they could compete for space in the market and somehow be successful. So there's that, right? That there's that in there as well. And sorry, I wanted to look up Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol to see how that one did at the same time as this one, because it came out the same year, right? And it's kind of the same idea. So one of the things that happens, I don't know when I'm doing my my podcast, a lot of times when I have guests on, I'm like looking things up, and when it's me with somebody else while they're talking, I can look things up. You may catch, if you ever look and if you ever listen to the podcast and notice that I sometimes respond and it doesn't sound like I'm responding exactly to what the guests are saying. It's because I got lost on an IMDb rabbit hole when I was like talking to them about something. And I'll sometimes listen back and be like, man, they said something really cool there. And I didn't respond at all because I wasn't paying attention. So really bad thing that I'm letting you in. But yeah, so just looking at Ghost Protocol, it actually did about the same. It did close to 700 million. So it did slightly better than Fast 5 at that time. But of course, it was more of an established big budget blockbuster franchise, right? Nobody was really expecting Fast and Furious to be on that level, to be at that mark. But if you remember in the 2010s, it was kind of like at that point, it was just like franchise city. Everybody was trying to get other franchises out to compete with the big ones. So then it was like, okay, let's try to do Terminator. Let's try to bring Terminator back. It didn't work. Let's try to bring back Charlie's Angels, right? Didn't work. There's always that sense of like, what's the next franchise that we can put together? Let's try to bring back Bad Boys, right? Bad Boys didn't work with it, another sequel there. But they wanted franchises. They wanted the next big thing. And I think Fast and the Furious was the one that gave everybody this sort of this hope that you could do it. You didn't have to be attached to a major comic book or a major established franchise like Star Wars or something like that. That you're, like Terminator. I mean, of course, we think of Terminator as a blockbuster franchise, but yeah, I mean, Terminator was probably the best example of one that got in a little bit too late. And by that time, once Disney really got its foothold in the mid-2010s, all bets were off, that there wasn't going to be anything else jumping in there. And Terminator is probably the best example of that. When Terminator comes out with their sequels, especially when they bring Arnold back, you could really see how Disney was able to choke them out in the market, right? And I'm trying to think of what year that was when I think it was Genesis came out. It was like they couldn't get on enough screens to have the kind of success that let's see here, 2015, right? 2015 is Terminator Genesis. That's the one. So right, 4 years after, so you can see, right, that it didn't take long after this that we get to that point where Disney has really, really gotten a stranglehold in the market. And so let's see. I mean, I don't think this one. So it did. I mean, it did close, right? It did 440 million. So it didn't do horribly, but it's that point where Disney's really taking over, and it's hard, right? If you don't have something established in there, they're coming in there and they're taking out a ton of different, taking out a ton of screens here, and it's hard. It's hard if you don't have something established to get the screens you need to make the kind of money back that a production like that would be on. So that's one of those kind of things that kind of hurts it. So okay, here's the one I was thinking of. I was thinking of 2019. Sorry about that. I'm kind of between my two Terminators. So it's Dark Fate. So Genesis actually didn't do so bad. Dark Fate, I think, is the one that they thought was going to kind of, it was going to do just as well, right? How Arnold did it and all that. And it barely doesn't even do 300 million worldwide on the box office. That was the one. So I think probably by the end of the 2010s, that's really where Disney really, really has that kind of dominance where they could take over the theaters in the summer, and really nothing else has a chance. I mean, even at that time, DC was having trouble too. But you're seeing the Fast and Furious movies, right, pulling over $1 billion at the same time. They're the one that's bucking the trend. And this is really where it starts, right? It starts here with Fast 5, and it just keeps building from there. And I think for me, going back and watching these like I did, I don't think I appreciated what was happening with Fast 5 at the time. I think it was. I think when I watched it, I was kind of like, what, I didn't necessarily know what was going on, but I just thought it was really great. I really liked a lot of what was happening in the movie, so I appreciated it all. And I didn't necessarily think like, okay, this movie is going to be the one that makes a stand. And what happens, right, of course, is that the pandemic comes and kind of just takes the whole movie industry, right, and just shakes it up completely. And now you've got a little bit more room. I mean, John Wick is another one that succeeded in the mid 2010s, kind of against all odds. And I think that's one that people were excited to see, that the most recent one come out. But I think overall in the theater now, right, more movies are making it, right? It's not so much this big tent like Marvel blockbuster, DC blockbuster, Star Wars blockbuster kind of thing. More movies are able to make it, but Fast and the Furious is the one that weathered the really, really difficult storm there to be able to kind of persevere through. So yeah, it's I don't know. This is that one that I always really like, and I always enjoy talking about it. And I think I even kind of like it a little bit better having watched part 4 with it. So I think it is a kind of a good double feature. But I also think you could do 5 by itself better than you could do 4 by itself. That's the other piece. Is this movie is just a good old fashioned fun actioner. Really great to see too that Spiro Razatos, who got his start in PM Entertainment in the DTV world, a good start before PM really, but that he's sort of made it to the big time here, and he's a big driving force for why a franchise like this is pulling in the kind of money that it is, and that it is having the success that it has. So yeah, all really, really, really fun stuff there. Oh, right. I don't know if you can hear me sighing here. One of the things I'm constantly out of breath. One of the things with doing the solo ones is I'm always out of breath. So I'm always trying to take in a good big breath before I start on the next piece. But yeah, I think this is a good place for us to leave it. So in 2 weeks' time, we'll be doing movies 6 and 7. So we'll be kind of fully ensconced in blockbuster world. And I believe 7 is the one that is like the first one that breaches, not broaches, I'm not presenting it as an idea, but it's breaches the $1 billion mark. So we're really, really moving into that blockbuster territory for these Fast and Furious films. But that'll be 2 weeks from now. Again, next week, we'll be back on the main pod with Ty from Comeuppance as we look at a couple Casper Van Dien films. Again, since I'm the only one here, I don't have a guest. I'll just be doing my own plugs as we wrap up. So the site, dtvconnoisseur.blogspot.com. That's really where you can find links to everything. Links to the novels, links to the Letterboxd page, links to social media, and links to the podcast. So dtvconnoisseur.blogspot.com. I am on Letterboxd. Letterboxd is a good one because you can see on Letterboxd what I've got in the hopper for what I'm going to be watching soon, but also a rough idea of what we might be doing for a review. So you can see, again, what ends up happening is a movie will be sitting there as the next one to review for a while I watch some other stuff and jump it up ahead in line. So it's not always the perfect one, but you can also see what's going on there, maybe make suggestions if you want. So feel free to reach out. Best way to contact the email, dtvconnoisseur@yahoo.com. So you can email me there. Also, Facebook, you can always message me on Facebook. Also, I would say the Facebook posts tend to be where a lot of the community happens. So people generally don't comment on the movies anymore, on the actual reviews, but they do comment on the Facebook posts. So that's always a good place for community, for people chatting about things like that. And then, of course, I am on Twitter as well, DTV Connoisseur. So you can always keep up to date with what's happening there. Again, if you'd like to buy one of my novels or all 3 of my novels, I would always appreciate that. I'll probably have the link. Usually I have the link to just Holtman Arms in the podcast description, but I think I'll put the link to my author page so you can go check out any or all of my 3 novels that are out there. So the first one is Chad and Accounting. That one I released actually during the pandemic. I self-published it then in 2020. It's about a guy who's he catches his girlfriend in bed with his best friend. He's devastated, kind of lives like a I said like a somnambulist for 5 years. He's essentially sleepwalking through life for 5 years, and then we kind of get him as he's sort of awakening. And it's very episodic, kind of driven on sort of different characters that he encounters as he's sort of getting his life back in together, and sort of how that goes. So he's working as an accountant for an insurance company. It's not a very fun job for him. It's kind of soul crushing for him. And then he ends up meeting this crazy Swedish guy who's, he's not a good person. I mean, he's racist, he's sexist, he's all kinds of bad things. But he works for a hedge fund, and the hedge fund needs an accountant, so he kind of gets in on that, gets out of his bad job and gets in on that, but then it's kind of a little bit of a wild ride for him from there. So China Accounting, that's my first novel. It's not the first novel I wrote. I actually wrote another novel, 29, that I just haven't gotten into a place that I want to self-publish it yet. But 29 is there, so China Accounting is there. Fun one, if you want to check that one out. A Girl and a Gun comes after that. It's the first of my author cycle. So I've got 3 books in the author cycle, 2 that have been published, 1 that's coming out this year. Girl and a Gun is about this character, Justin Blackburn, who he is an author. He's from Maine. He's living in Boston. He writes a novel, and it's mildly successful, relatively successful. I ended up getting into writing TV shows, but one of the things is, as he's starting out as a writer, girl that he went to college with that he has a thing for, she starts a fetish porn site to make money, and she taps him to write the scripts for it. And then she becomes famous as a reality show star. She's on what my novel's equivalent of The Bachelorette. I called it The Single Lady. So she's the single lady. She's really popular. And then they find out about her running this fetish porn site, and the whole thing comes crashing down. He has to go kind of underground for a bit, kind of, go off the grid a little bit. And he emerges successful later on as a screenwriter and gets tapped to make a movie called A Girl and a Gun that stars a rom-com who's just notoriously bad to work with. And the project consumes him completely, and it almost starts to kill him. So as you're reading the book, it starts to really consume him and take him over there. So that's A Girl and a Gun. And then the second in the author cycle, Holtman Arms, which I just released last year, follows a character, Colvin Hall, who is a romance novelist who writes under the pen name Mary Ballantyne. And the novels are becoming really successful, and he's not really sure what to do with this success that comes in here, because essentially his whole life, he because he's this successful author, but nobody can know he's the author. He has to hide his wealth. He can't show how much money he has, how successful he is, all of that kind of stuff. And it's starting to kind of wear on him a bit. There also is a sense of arrested development in him. So it's almost like, yes, part of it is he is trying to live a less ostentatious life because he can't show everybody how much he's making, but part of it is he just doesn't know how to really be an adult. Like, he never buys a car. He lives in a 2-bedroom apartment. He does maybe like I've done before, eats Doritos for dinner. I may have done that before, even as an adult. So some stuff like that in there, but definitely kind of a fun novel. It's again, it's like the second in the author cycle, so he's sort of growing into that. And what happens with him is at the same time that he's sort of wrestling with these issues with his novels being successful, he starts dating a girl who has a thing for. I changed the name of McDonald's to Von Dieter's. That's the chain. She has a big thing for this fast food chain, Von Dieter's, and she goes to as many as she can. She just plans her vacations around them. And in the novel, there's a separatist group in North Dakota that's trying to break away from the rest of the U.S., who's like violently trying to break away. And she wants to go to some Von Dieter's in North Dakota to kind of check them off her list, because she's never been to any in that state before. So we get sort of a little impending doom there. What's going to happen with our character as he goes into North Dakota at that time when the separatist groups are starting to take over. So that's that novel. Yeah, and then the third one in that series that I'm hoping to get out in August, it's called Don's House in the Mountains, and it's about a guy who has been writing for like 20 years, and his novels really hadn't done anything, and suddenly they just take off. They get a blurb. Actually, Justin Blackburn from Girl and a Gun is the one who writes a blurb about his book, and it takes off. And all of his books that he'd written before that take off, and suddenly he's worth $150 million, and his wife can't handle it, and so she wants a divorce from him, so he's living by himself in a house in the White Mountains. And it kind of has a little bit of a Tempest vibe to it, a little bit of a Iris Murdoch novel, The Sea, has a little bit of that element in there. But also as someone who's like really rich, right? His house, it's almost like a Bugs Bunny quality where the house has everything. Whenever somebody needs something, the house has it. And yeah, so in him sort of coping with this new life where he's just suddenly really rich, but he's alone. So that one, I'm hoping August. I'm doing a read through of it right now. So I'm hoping that August will be the final read through. As I was reading through it this time, I thought maybe it would be good enough to publish, but I think it needs another read through. I noticed a couple continuity issues, some typos in there. So I think one more proofread, and I think it'll be ready to go. So yeah, so look forward to that. Hopefully if you're reading my novels, that fourth one will be coming out in August. But before that, again, if you're interested, I always appreciate if someone wants to buy one of my books. So yeah, and of course, always let me know if you have any questions or anything like that. But the link to my author page will be in the site. Also, we have a Threadless page. So if you're interested in mugs, DTV connoisseur themed mugs, shirts, I have some with the basic logo, but also John Cross from the After Movie Diner, who also does our theme song here. He did some really great designs for some of the shirts there. So if you're interested, always appreciate that as well. All right, well, that is it. We'll wrap this up, but thank you everybody for listening, and we'll talk soon. Bye, everyone.
Direct